What is Palantir? Of course, you know what the Palantir are, the seeing stones of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, of course, created by the elves of Valinor in the First Age. But no, the focus of, by the way, it is where the company got its name, but the focus of today's podcast is the company, Palantir. 10 years ago, nobody knew what Palantir was. 5 years ago, people protested Palantir. That's right, protested. Why? They did work with the Defense Department. Different times. Today, Palantir is worth $180 billion. It's a mystery to a lot of people. How did it get this big? What do they really do? They're considered one of the top AI firms in the world. Countries that use their products say their defense is transformed. Companies that use their products say their revenue is changed by, in some cases, multiples. People try to figure out what the company does, what is really odd, not odd, but just kind of opaque management style people don't quite understand. Their CEO's really quirky. Nobody really quite understands this company, except my guest today. My guest today was one of Palantir's first employees. He's now a venture capitalist, and he'll tell you about that. His company's called Forward Deployed, and we'll tell you why that is. But he was one of the first employees there, wanted to work there, thought it would be the greatest thing that could happen to him if he got a job there. Spoiler alert, he did. And he invested in the company. I don't mean he got stock options. I mean he invested in the company. He got deployed to Kandahar with the company. He got shot at. This guy's not like your typical VC, and this is not like your typical story about a company. But I think you're going to like my conversation with Mark Scianna. Welcome back. It's the Something Venture podcast. I'm Ken Lindstrom. I'm a partner at the venture capital firm 8-Bit Capital. We do seed and pre-seed investing. We're based here in San Francisco, California. And I have this podcast. I think you'll enjoy this episode. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I'm Ken Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today, Mark Scianna. How are you doing?
Oh, doing great. How you doing, Ken?
Great. Well, thanks so much for doing this. Mark's a venture capitalist, and now you're thinking, okay, that's not that interesting. But hang on, he's a venture capitalist. He started his own firm called Forward Deployed. That may start sounding a little bit familiar with you. That's a concept from Palantir, which is the place that he worked. They invest in things like, they Forward Deployed, in things like national security, defense, supply chain, aerospace, artificial intelligence, and public safety. And Palantir has become a company in all the world where maybe 5 or 6 or 10 years ago, it was really weird and you didn't know what it was and you didn't really care because it wasn't going to go anywhere anyway. And all of a sudden, it's worth $150 billion. It's this super critical company in the world of AI. Nobody still really understands what it does. But I think along with SpaceX, it's become a company where you're like, what the hell happened? Like, well, I wasn't paying attention. So it's fascinating. And I thought we'd start. I'd love to hear, you've just been so deeply involved with that company. But I'd love to get a sense of how it all started for you, that you even found yourself in the tech world, much less this very specific part of it.
Sure, definitely. I love telling this story, and I will say it's still a little strange to hear myself referred to as a venture capitalist. I still relate and identify as an engineer.
It's funny.
And
I've got that too. You know, my partner and I were entrepreneurs, or are entrepreneurs, but we're founders for years and years. And you know, venture capitalists are great, but you kind of make fun of them your whole life too, a little bit. And then all of a sudden, so I totally understand where you're coming from.
yeah, and I definitely never saw this coming. Something that I stumbled on and fell in love with.
Yeah.
But so I grew up here in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the South Bay. Grew up in a manufacturing household. My grandfather started a manufacturing company, and my dad and my uncles worked there. I was sweeping the shop floors in the summertime. But I was always, I've always been a fairly patriotic dude. And when I was in middle school, wanted to be an FBI agent. And then I discovered computers, and then kind of, thought that I'd be work for the CIA and wanted to
Yeah.
build, spy gadgets and that kind of thing.
And what computer did you, like, where did you start? Like, what kind of computer was it?
It was a mix of Macs that were kind of introduced in school,
Yeah.
um, and then um, and then it was like Commodores and all kinds of stuff like
Yeah.
that,
Okay.
Radio Shack, and so
You can say this
yeah, and
was
then
it the TRS? Was that the Radio Shack one?
no, it had dual floppies. I don't remember the model
Okay.
number, and you're
Yeah.
constantly like flipping back and forth between the two,
Yeah. Okay.
um, and then yeah, and then so grew up in the Bay Area, then discovered computers, went to college, studied computer science, came back to the Bay Area and tried my hand at a startup. Ended up doing I started doing some consulting with some education companies, and actually that was kind of in the time when spyware was a big problem. Like every computer was infected with all these crazy pop-ups,
Yeah.
and was helping them with that, and ended up playing around with some DNS to do some content filtering and try and just prevent some of the problems. And so kind of stumbled on this idea and started a company that crashed and burned, and actually was I was quite embarrassed and ashamed about that failure for a
Oh.
while. I didn't talk about it much, and but I had just the great. Oh, and then I also didn't mention shortly out of college, I almost went to work for the CIA. Actually, ended up I did apply and got a job offer, but
Yeah.
didn't want to. It was the directorate of administration, and I didn't want to fix broken printers and computers. And so, anyways, I was a little lost there for some time, and then I just had the great fortune of finding Palantir in 2008. My
Yeah.
brother was working there. Some high school friends were working there, and they came by my house with a physical DVD of a demo, and I saw this early prototype of Palantir, and it was just everything I had ever wanted to do in one. It was like this kind of fast moving startup working in national security, and in that moment, I just knew I had to go work there. And
And what was it
so,
like? What were you seeing in 2008 in a DV in a DVD?
well, 9/11 was a pretty big moment
Yeah.
in my upbringing, and so just this idea of we still hadn't found Bin Laden, and where there were still all these different threats. There was like the anthrax scare, and a guy trying to blow up his shoes on a plane,
Yeah. Right.
and so kind of this idea of trying to find a needle in the haystack. Computers were becoming quite powerful and obviously a great tool for analysts, but um, there were some concerns around privacy and civil liberties and all that stuff. And so what I saw in the demo was just incredible software that could make a difference, that could really impact our lives and make our country a better, safer place. And so, yeah, and it really called. I don't know. I felt really compelled. It was something I wanted to work on when I saw
Yeah.
it. I thought, man, I,
And
I got to meet these guys.
and what's Palantir like in 2008? Like who, there's all these people associated with it now, but who's running around at Palantir in 2008? Is it Peter Thiel or
My
who's the cast of
first,
characters then?
yeah, my first primary contact was with Shyam Sankar, and he's the CTO today. He's an incredible guy, and so I applied. I first had a conversation with him. Actually, kind of funny. I loved it. I was applying for this role of forward deployed engineer. Forward, that's of course where the name of my fund comes from.
Yeah.
And so I had a conversation with him, and they were very upfront and direct with how intense of a place this was. They were in it to win it, and it was just all hands on deck. Everyone was working literally 7 days a week, you know, 12, 15-hour days. And they were very direct about that. Like, here's what we want to do, but if you join the team, you're all in.
Yeah.
So I spent some months in conversation with them, like really trying to understand. I took it really seriously. Like if I was going to do this, I was really going to go all in.
Yeah.
And so I spent a few months longer than I probably should have. I should have just jumped right in, but I ended up going through the interview process. One funny thing, I thought I was applying for this forward deployed engineer role, And then I ended up going through this extensive interview process. I don't know, 18 interviews or something. Met
Good Lord.
most of the team, and I thought a mistake had happened. Um, I was the questions I was getting in the interview process were around testing, software testing, um, and um, and I just rolled with it. I was, by then, I spent some time talking to friends and really understanding the company, and I wanted to work there. I wanted to be a part of the team and the mission, and um, and I thought there had been some kind of mistake. I was uh, answering questions about software testing, and then but I just went with it. At the end of the day, I circled back with Sham, and he said, as you probably figured out by now. Um, I thought, QA testing, software testing would be a good place for you to start. Some of our best forward deployed engineers have come out of that team. You'll get exposure very quickly to every single product. You'll have some influence on how it's being built. And so I ended up starting as a
Wow.
quality engineer.
Just get
I
going.
still I still don't know if that was some kind of test
If
to
you'd
see if
still
I was
stick
up for
around.
anything.
Yeah.
No, yeah, just like
What?
yeah.
So what? So okay. So now you're on the ship. What like and what's going on around you? Like how are your friends reacting? They're all going to Facebook and Google and that kind of thing. Were they just like, what the hell is a someone probably knew what a Palantir was because they probably
Well,
told. But
yeah, I would
what was it
say at
like?
that time, and even over the next few years, most people had never heard of Palantir. If you had heard of us, you didn't like us. We
Yeah.
had
Why didn't people like you? Like, what did they know or think they knew that they didn't like?
Well, over those first few years, I know people were protesting. There were people in this world that are going to get mad about anything. There were
That's right.
people that were upset that we were taking up too much real estate in Palo Alto. There were people that were upset that we were working with the Department of Defense. There were people that were upset when we had a contract with ICE, and so there was just all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. I've mostly just kept my head down. I don't do a whole lot of these kinds of things, and I just love working with people, trying to solve hard problems,
Yeah.
build important things, and so I just got to work. I joined Palantir, and I just started working really hard.
Yeah.
I was volunteering for just about anything that came up,
Yeah.
and so pretty quickly got involved in even though my day to day job was a testing role, I was volunteering to go out to customer demos and run. I got to know the software very well really quickly, and so I started volunteering. I started to fill in for some of the forward deployed engineers that were out. I remember one of the first trips I took was to a Navy SEAL base, and I had these laptops with Palantir software, and we were doing a training exercise, and I was kind of setting up the servers and doing a lot of the technical stuff, but then just right away just jumped in and helped with training and all of that. So I was early on just looking for ways to help out. And
And so were these your first customers? The Navy SEAL coming in there, and were you there before they had
well,
customers or?
yeah. So when I started, we had some funding from Incutel, and so through that we had a connection to the CIA, and we were. It was all hands on deck trying to go enterprise with the CIA. That was the main effort when I started, and so the kind of on the product development side, in my day to day role, I was um, we had one of the founders and a couple of engineers would go out to DC every couple of weeks. And in fact, one of the founders developed this nickname at the CIA. He was known as Mr. 2 Weeks. And basically, he'd go out, give a demo of some of the things we had built, get some feedback, and then he'd come back to Palo Alto and we'd have, we'd get a readout. Here's what they liked. Here's what they didn't like. Here's what we need to build right now.
Right.
And so the joke in the CIA was, you can tell this guy anything you want, and he'll be back with it in 2 weeks, done. And I was on the other side of that. We'd get like the new list of things to build, and we were just moving so fast that
Yeah.
it was very intense and fun.
That's
And
incredible.
I just really quickly figured out this was my place. This was my
Yeah.
chance. This was
So
my chance to make it. And
at what point do you get forward, start getting deployed and getting on airplanes and getting yourself into? I mean, it's almost like you didn't join the CIA, but you joined the thing working for the CIA.
yeah, once I found it, I knew I was in the right spot.
Yeah.
So let's see what happened. So we had tried selling within the DoD, kind of top down. That didn't go anywhere. We didn't. At least I didn't really understand why at the time. Um, but we but we found when a military unit is deploying, they have some discretionary funds that they can spend on anything they want. And we found this army unit, or actually this army unit found us. They weren't happy with their intelligence tools. They saw what we were building. They were intrigued. They reached out. We Some folks on the team, not me at first, went up to Washington State and were showing them kind of what we were building. They started going through pre-deployment training, and so you're going out to the California desert and doing some
Yeah.
exercises. And so we started going out with them, and so we just really quickly built a modified version of our core platform, but for this use case they had, which was disconnected operations. So at the highest levels, at the brigade, they had pretty good connectivity. They could use kind of enterprise software tools like Palantir or those kinds of things. But out at these remote forward operating bases, they had weak, very, very limited connectivity. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And so that was their pain point, was how do we give these young intelligence analysts, I mean, literally like 18-year-olds, these kinds of capabilities, but out at the front lines. And so we worked on a modified version of the Palantir software that we called Palantir Forward. Actually, I'm wearing my Palantir Forward T-shirt.
That's
right
very nice. And how do you how do you eventually, like, wars going on here and there? How do you eventually get yourself, like, don't you end up in places like
Yeah.
really hot war zone places?
Okay. Here's what happened. So we were working on this new version of the software, and it was a pretty small team. So we had a few forward deployed engineers that were out at these training exercises. I was back in Palo Alto building this new version of Palantir, and as this developed over a few months, and we secured a contract with them. That contract required two engineers to go with the customer to Kandahar, and and years later we figured out that you can there are contractors that you can like hire to do this kind of work, but of course that takes time to find those relationships
Yeah.
and train up people like that to represent you in war zones. Um, we were literally like building the plane while we were flying it, and so I volunteered to do that. There were about 4 or 5 of us working on the product,
Yeah.
and so there was a pretty limited number of people who really understood how it worked. And I had just been pouring my life into this product, and it just felt like my baby. And
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine just throwing it over the fence and
Yeah.
hoping that it worked, or trying, in a few weeks' time, trying to train someone else to do
Yeah.
this and represent our company and really ensure that this was going to work. And so
So off to
I,
Kandahar.
that's right. Yeah. So I signed up
How
for
does one get to Kandahar during a war? Like, you take a
um,
United SFO to Kandahar, I don't think.
actually, we did eventually figure out how to get there commercially, but um, so for that first deployment that I did, I traveled with the unit. So the army has you get some papers, you're
Yeah.
cleared for deploying. I went through this thing called CRC. It's like Combat Readiness Center, and they give you like vaccinations and like make sure you
Uh,
have a will, and um, tell you not to step on funny looking things, and
yeah.
things like that.
Right.
And then I flew with them,
Yeah.
and so that's how I got there. Years later, we figured out some easier ways to get there, but yeah,
So I want to
um,
foreshadow this. Eventually, you become a venture capitalist. For now, we're in Kandahar,
yeah,
but you would, looking at your track record, you were a seed investor in some amazing things. One of which was Palantir. Now, how does that doesn't usually? I assume you don't mean you just got some stock options, which was fantastic, good for you. But did you also invest in this company as well?
yeah. Good timing, because this actually happened right as I was heading out to Kandahar. So um, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. One big mistake I made when I was joining Palantir, they had this option when you were signing your offer letter, you could choose high stock, low salary, or low stock, high salary.
Uh-huh.
And I had been in the workforce for a few years, so they were all extremely low salary. It was just like low, lower, and
Right.
lowest.
Right.
And I just couldn't figure out how the heck to survive on how low the salary was. So I told them, I was like, "Hey, I'm all in on Palantir, but I need this. I need like this highest level of salary because even at that level, it was way lower than what I had been making. And anyways, I joined Palantir, and within a few weeks, I realized what a massive mistake I've made. The place was so special. I mean, it was everyone around me was smarter than me. Just I told you already just how intense the culture was, and we were working really hard. So I tried fixing that mistake. First, I tried going back to my boss and saying, "Hey, it's only been a couple weeks. Can I change that? I want more stock." No, sorry, it's already been approved by the board. So I was just on a mission to get more equity in this company. And as I just got more and more excited about what we were doing, invested in the company, I wanted more stock. So I converted my first raise into stock. I converted my bonuses into stock. I was just on the hunt for more equity, and
Wow.
I knew I was going to be there for a long time, and
And
like I said, just pour my life into it. So,
did you know
um,
anything about the investors or the board at this time, or was that just kind of above where you were operating?
no, no, I mean, I knew, Peter Thiel and Incutel, and that was about it. But it was, that's one thing I enjoy about venture capital is, you you get to know companies, you get to know the people inside of them, what makes them unique, what makes them special, and it's perfectly legal to trade on that
Yeah.
in a
Right.
private company. And so that's kind of how that came about. I had this really strong desire to get more equity. We had these Monday morning stand-ups with the whole company. We all fit in one room, and so at one of these meetings, Bob McGrew, actually one of the directors, got up and said, he's giving the update, and he says, "Oh yeah, and by the way, we're going to raise a new round of venture capital." Boom, there's my opportunity. So after that meeting, I just naively walk in the CFO's office and I say, "Hey, I heard we're raising some money. I'd like to invest." And
Yeah.
and this guy
So
and Jason's, yeah, go ahead.
so you just casually make one of the best investments in venture history.
That's right.
That's
I
another.
wish it was that easy. He like first he literally laughed me out of the room. He's like,
Uh,
"Wait, what? You want what?" I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to invest. I don't have, you know." And so, anyways, they first I got laughed out of the room. Then I had this trip to Kandahar coming up, and I could tell like they were very nicely, in a kind way, kind of ignoring me, saying, "Okay, we'll talk about it later. We'll talk
yeah.
about it later." Actually, Sham called me and said, "Hey, I heard you're trying to invest. You have stock options, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I know that."
Wow. That's
So,
amazing.
anyways, I go back in to the CFO's office, a few weeks before I leave for Kandahar, and by then I felt like I was getting the runaround a little bit, and I just said, "Hey, I'm going to Kandahar in 2 weeks, for you and for me and for all of us, and I want
Yeah.
more equity in this company, and I'll pay for it." I brought my checkbook. Let's do this right now. And so, boom, I write Palantir a $32,000 check in 2009,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was my first angel investment. And
Oh,
that,
good job. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it didn't take off right away. This took many years to develop, but that actually kind of opened, even though I grew up here in Silicon Valley and I just wasn't that familiar with venture capital, and I kind of learned it all through Palantir, but that opened my eyes to this possibility that, hey, I could invest in startups, and if I could talk them into letting me invest, I could probably do that elsewhere. And so that's what
Well,
kind of started that.
it's kind of incredible when you think about it that we do this kind of investing because you take these companies that are worth $100 billion in the public market and you can invest in them and then they'll become worth 300. I mean, these numbers are crazy, but 300 billion. But if you invest when the company's like at that stage, you can ride a company from being in the whole world like you can't do this anywhere else. Companies that go from being worth $10 million or 50 million to 100 billion. It's
Mhm.
just it doesn't happen 9 times out of 10. But boy, when it does, it's just incredible.
That's right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you just need one of those winners
And
in
you
your
did it with
fund to make it. And
you did
yeah.
it with your first one. So at some point the word goes out and Palantir just starts getting people are saying good things, glowing reviews. This thing's working, right? And it just starts to take off, right?
Well, this was a long, gradual process for me internally. It wasn't that fast, at least for me. It wasn't as fast as we wanted it to be.
Right.
We were working hard. So I would say word got out within the DoD user base. So people that were using our tools in places that mattered, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So I ended up, I did that 3 month stint in Kandahar. The users there loved it. They were turning over to a new unit People in other units in Kandahar started hearing about it. There were these like weekly intelligence meetings.
Yeah.
And so, I was in Kandahar. We set up servers. I did data integrations. First time I was ever on a helicopter, I flew out to the Pakistani border, this town called
Wow.
Spin Boldak. So we're traveling around, we're training users, we're meeting new units, or they're hearing about it from our customer. And so word is spreading within the user base, but I wouldn't say like most of the world
Right.
still wasn't aware of what
But
Palantir was.
you start running into roadblocks with Palantir, though, right? This is a big conspiracy theory emerge at some point. Do I have that right?
Um, there was so we did have this unit that I was working with loved Palantir. The Army sent a test and evaluation center, this ATAC group, to evaluate how we did. We got glowing reviews from them, and but then um, no, I'm an engineer. I'm doing the work on the ground. I wasn't too involved with politics and some of the stuff that was happening but there did end up being this review of Palantir that got withdrawn and then replaced with something not as good. And there was a bit of a conspiracy happening, and Congress got involved. There was a big investigation. We ended up suing the Army in a similar way as SpaceX suing the Air Force, which is, of course, not ideal. That you don't want to be
Right.
suing your customer. That was pretty unfortunate. We wanted to work with the Army. Of course, we were working with the Army, and we had plans. Actually, this was when there was shortly after Obama had come into office. We're pulling out of Iraq. We're surging into Kandahar.
Yeah.
They were sending in 9 brigades, and so we were internally really gearing up for this big effort to help out the military in Afghanistan. But that ended up all getting blocked,
Right.
kind of up at the higher political levels.
Yeah. And
And
what
so
was
that work
what
stopped. Yeah.
was the issue that you were the Silicon Valley guys they didn't want to help, or their buddy had a competing software that they wanted to use? Like, what was kind of the simple version of what happened there?
I probably can't get into it too much, but
Yeah.
I would say it was that on some level, we were competitive with other programs that already existed in the military. And so I don't know exactly what was going on, but we ended up getting blocked from doing that work.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, luckily, at the same time, we were making really great progress with special operations. So there's a
Right.
separate command, special operation command, and we had some contracts with them. And so, I just pretty seamlessly kind of jumped from the work I was doing with this Army unit over
Yeah.
to a special operations groups. And so, at that time, one of the reasons I stayed in Kandahar so long was because I didn't have access to these classified networks. I couldn't administer these machines remotely, and so to do that,
Right.
we had to kind of establish relationships and access to military bases and stuff in the U.S. But so once that got sorted out, I'm back home. I ended up moving out to DC with my family, and then I was heading up. I was the tech lead for our special operations
Yeah.
work, and so then that started growing really really quickly. And then boom, I was back. Then I started doing a lot of trips into. I was in Afghanistan 4 or 5 times,
How'd
setting
that
up new
go?
servers,
Did that
and
ever?
then
I
I was
mean,
out in Iraq.
you're setting up servers, but you're in a war zone. Did that ever get kind of a little bit intense, or did you
You know,
ever like?
yes, yes, it did. Um, for the most part, I was on these big bases and things were very safe. And everyone joked there, like, this place is safer than New York City. Um, that said, there were always things that would happen with, it was pretty common to get rocketed. So even on like Kandahar Air Base, Bagram Air Base, they would get rocketed. But they were not very accurate rockets. And for the most part, these alarms would go off. You wouldn't normally even hear a boom. And but you'd run to the bunker, and over time you kind of get numb to it,
Yeah.
and it feels normal. However, there were a few times, one time some folks got on base that weren't supposed to be there. There was a big lockdown, but then and then the worst of it, there. So we started pushing out Palantir this product I was building were these like laptops that folks out in forward operating bases would use. And so sometimes I was getting out into more remote regions um, to set up services, or to kind of help get some of our FSRs, these field service representatives, spun up. I was out in this place called Terran Cow. It was and the Navy SEALs were running this compound, and it was my first night there. And my job there, this was in April of 2011, and my job there was to just get kind of the service, get the Palantir software installed, get it up and running, so that training could begin with these users. And so we had someone there. I was traveling with a guy with a guy named Matt, and he was going to stay there long term, kind of represent Palantir, take care of all the users. I was going to stay a couple of days. I end up pulling an all nighter because we're trying to get ready. He told me, if you can get this done, if you can get this ready in the morning, I'll start training right away. So he's off sleeping. I'm setting up services. Um, End up pulling an all nighter, and then I guess it was that next day. So I end up staying up through that night, through that next day. Training gets started. Things are good. That next night, we're asleep in this transient tent, and the alarms start going off. There's a big generator running next to us. I've got earplugs in, and then do 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 incoming, incoming, do do do
Yeah.
incoming. And unfortunately, by then I'd spent months in Afghanistan, and you just get used to this. And most of the time, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
This place was adjacent to a little town, and I didn't know it, but these rockets were being fired from on top of a school building right next to our base, and they came in. They came in. All three rockets came in really tight in this little compound I was in, and it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
Wow.
There was a huge, I heard I'll never forget the sound of the engines kind of coming over real fast, and then boom, like a big earthquake. And they have these rocks all over the ground because when it rains, things flood and get all muddy, and these rocks just scattered everywhere. And so then I kind of yelled out to this army guy that I was bunked next to, that I had been traveling with, Matt, what do I do? And we kept our body armor and helmet. You keep that right next to your cot. So
Yeah.
so we both just rolled off the cots, kind of threw our body armor over us, and just waited for things to clear. So three rockets came in, two exploded. One guy got really injured and got medevaced out.
Yeah.
And that kind of messed me up, honestly. But I still had a job to do. We weren't done yet, so so I didn't go back to that tent.
Wow.
We got cleared out. We had to go into this hard stand building, and so I just finished up my work there over the next 2 or 3 days. I called home to a few people to let them know what had happened on a kind of high level, but I wanted to finish the work. I didn't want to get
Yeah.
sent home, and I didn't want my wife to be scared. I didn't tell her
Right.
what happened for probably 6 or 7 years. Um, and but yeah, that was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. But I stayed there. They're kind of cool end of the story here. Stayed there, got all the software set up, got all the data integrations going. Flew home, and then the very next day after I got home, is when the U.S. got Bin Laden, and
Wow.
it was very cool. And I remember my mom calling, because the last, I would keep my folks updated, and I told them, hey, I'm going out to this place. I'm working with some Navy SEALs. I'm really excited about it. And then my first time working, downrange with Navy SEALs,
Yeah.
and then I'll be home. So I'll be home in a couple of days, and then I get home and my mom calls, and I heard they just got Bin Laden. Did you have anything to do with that? And I didn't,
Wow.
but to be clear, and I said, Mom, I really can't talk about it.
Yeah. That's incredible. So you have the obviously incredible career at Palantir. What are the ideas that like what animates Palantir? Like did it just seems like a different like the CEO seems like a different kind of guy. It just seems like a different kind of environment from a lot of firms. Is there like a philosophy? I mean, forward deployed is a very specific concept. Are there philosophies that animated it? Was there a particular person that animated it? Like, it just didn't like the other companies.
Yeah, from my perspective, there were a couple things. One is this forward deployed thing. So, my boss told me over and over again, we want to put engineers as close to the problems that they're trying to solve as possible. So if the users that you're working with, but the problem that you're trying to solve is in Kandahar, go to Kandahar. And maybe that sounds simple, but other places don't do that. You end up
Right.
with consultants or product managers or things like that are telling engineers what to do. And and so I think if you look at most organizations, you have software engineers that don't travel or don't travel much. And at Palantir, they really deeply believed in having engineers directly exposed to the problems they're trying to solve,
Right.
embedded with the users. So I like literally was sitting next to the users that were doing their job, and I could see firsthand what they were trying to do. I would build trust, and so that was very different. The other thing that was pretty wildly different in my experience was this bias towards action. I remember it was just like every day, we were moving so fast, and the company is still this way. Um, I remember one time my boss was out of town for his honeymoon or something, and I sent an email, and he was on the distribution list, and I got this autoresponder, and it said, and the autoresponder said, "I'm out of town for a couple of days. If you really need to talk to someone, contact this person." And then there was a paragraph that said, "But just do what you think is right. I would much rather you do something, even if it's the wrong thing, and we can clean it up later. You'll learn from it. Just do what you think is right."
Yeah.
And so that was the culture. And, even, and kind of on those same lines, I remember one time Karp getting up in front of the company,
This is the CEO,
the
right?
C, yeah, the CEO, Alex
Yeah.
Karp.
Yeah.
And he gets up in front of the company and, and he said, he said, part of a longer story, he said, part of the reason why we hire really smart people is so we don't have to tell them what to do. Just do what you think, do what you know is right, do what you think is right. And if you make a mistake, you'll learn from it, but just do it. And so there was really this culture um, of action.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What do you make of Palantir today? It sits at $150 billion. By some measures, it's just getting started. The CEO Karp has become kind of one of the. There's a few of these Silicon Valley people who have just become larger than life. The Mark Andreessen and David Sachs and him who don't really care, really, like they're not really polished PR people. They just say things straight, and people kind of love it. Actually, or certain set of people really are kind of enjoying it. But what should we make of this thing? It's $150 billion. It's just getting started moving into other industries, even, right? It hasn't even really cracked defense, as I understand it, or taken over defense.
Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I started a fund and why I'm investing in the things I'm investing in is, there's this, you mentioned Mark Andreessen, there's this famous quote, software is eating the world. And
Yeah.
you've seen that play out in consumer sectors, but some of the industries, some of the institutions that we rely on, that we depend on, that are most critical to the future of our country, just have yet to be truly transformed and modernized by software. And so what Palantir is doing today is, they're really helping make our country better, help these big institutions move faster, be more efficient, and serve all of us better. They've got their hands in all kinds of things. I worked on defense the whole time I was there, and while I was a forward deployed engineer, within the DoD, I was in Japan and Germany and Iraq and Afghanistan and Africa. My colleagues were, they were embedded with the CDC, they were embedded with Airbus and
Yeah.
BP and elsewhere, and so there's a lot that Palantir is doing that's kind of outside of my exposure, but yeah, they're doing really great work, I'm still the biggest fan.
Yeah, I bet. So when you have the idea, okay, I've worked at Palantir, but I'm not going to do it for 20 more years. I'm an investor. and I can actually do this full time, which is kind of a pretty crazy idea. Like, how does that idea come to you, and then how do you sort of actualize it?
Yeah, so I mentioned I did that seed investment, kind of opened up that idea that hey, I could probably get equity elsewhere. Gary Tan had been at Palantir.
Yeah.
He left kind of as I was coming in, but I remembered following him and his I was using he went through YC, started a company. I was using his product, and then his company got bought by Twitter. He went back to YC as a partner, and I had I had tried investing in some YC companies that I liked, and I couldn't get those deals done. They would say, come meet us at demo day." That was kind of the gatekeeping at the time,
Yeah.
and but kind of through that connection with Gary, I got it. I got an invite to YC, and so I started just learning a lot about angel investing through YC. They had I took a week off of work and went through this program called it was Startup School for Investors,
Yep.
and it was just like a group of angel investors and emerging managers, and just I learned a ton through YC. Never with originally never with the intent of being a professional VC. I just really enjoyed working with founders, helping them kind of with some of the lessons learned from Palantir and trying to achieve some of that same success we had, and also avoid the many mistakes we made. We made a ton of mistakes,
Yeah.
and so I just liked that. And I think kind of the bigger that Palantir got, I still loved the company and the mission, but I just missed those early, super chaotic, near death experiences of a startup,
Wow.
um, and once in a while a rocket.
Yeah.
But I just found it very rewarding to work with founders, and so
And you were
I ended
angel
up in
investing along the way too, right?
I'm angel investing, yeah,
Yeah.
and I was able to sell some of my Palantir shares on the secondary market, and that was fueling more investment. And so I ended up deploying about $500,000 of my own capital over 10 years. Um, I put it in 2015. I invested in a company called Oklo, and they just went public this year. And I remember so I invested in 2015. Awesome founders working on fast fission reactors, and in by 2018 they were doing really well. They had just hired an incredible team. They had by then they had Sam Altman as chairman of the board, pulled together just like the who's who of investors, and had hired a great team. And they were doing a Series A. And I remember for the first time seeing a cap table of an angel investment I had done, and it was just the who's who of investors on this deal.
Yeah.
Joe Lonsdale's name was on there, and Lon Conway, and then this like random guy Mark Scianna at the bottom with this tiny little check.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in a place to invest, even though I deeply believed in the company and I would have loved to support them. But I didn't have a fund I was investing out of. Some months maybe I had some liquid cash, some months I didn't. I remember
Right.
passing on that round and thinking, if I did this full time and I had a fund to invest out of, one, I could better serve founders, and two, I could just have more impact. And by then, it was clear that I really loved doing it, and so
Yeah.
that was when I knew I was eventually going to do this full time. I wasn't
Yeah.
sure. I took pretty serious the responsibility of managing other people's capital, so that took me some time to kind of get over the hump.
It's a completely
Um,
different thing, right? Than being an
yeah,
angel investor. And it's funny when you look at those people on that cap table because, you know, I mean, maybe it's kind of a problem that people don't have access to this particular career. But there's very few people in the world who can do what you do. Like, it's just kind of a very weird, like, you kind of have to be in Silicon Valley and have worked there and know what a Joe Lonsdale is, right? And like,
mhm.
meet people and go to Y Combinator and find that particular company. I don't know if there's 10,000 people in the world who could really do it, and be on that cap table. And maybe that's a problem and, access and all that. But it's kind of when you get to do it, I'm not sure everyone's appreciative of it, but you really should be.
Yeah, yeah. I think Palantir accidentally created the world's best startup incubator. It's
Yeah.
become this founder factory. You
Yeah.
take
Why
these like
is Why do you think that is? I was thinking about this because Palantir is like the top of the list. Like people from Palantir leave and start a company, and boy, you're paying attention if you're a venture capitalist what they're doing.
Yeah.
Facebook, Google, many huge, more employees. Eh, like they're not, don't seem to be startup factories. Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I think it is a couple of things. One, this forward deployed model. They hired really well, and then they sent engineers out to go solve problems. And so, like I said, for me that was the DoD, but other people were out at like BP Oil and Airbus and the Federal Reserve, and you can't help but see all the other problems and opportunities out there.
Right.
And then another thing is we just had incredible agency. Um, when I was sent to Kandahar, for example, it was nobody gave me explicit instructions like we need you to do this, this, and this. I had maybe a weekly call or so. I was giving people updates on what I was doing, but it was like go out there and win. That's the mission. Go out there and win. Call us if you need us. And so just you hire well, you see a lot of the problems in the world at these big, massive institutions. Palantir is working with the biggest institutions in the world. And then three, you get agency, and you just learn a ton. And so I think, and then the final piece in 2020, Palantir went public. So now you've got folks with a little cash in their pockets, and they can afford to go out and chase their dreams and try and build something new. Um, and so I think that all that stuff kind of feeds into that.
So how did you put together your fund? Now you got to go convince other people to, give you their money to, to invest. A little different than doing your own thing.
You,
How'd you kind of put it together?
I'll be honest, that was the one piece of this I had no idea
Yeah.
what I was doing, and so I just did it like I do everything else. You just need to start doing it. And I didn't have a master plan, but I knew that I had some. So what I did was I came across my first first few opportunities. Actually, one of the first investments I made from the fund was in a deal that we did together. And but so I had some opportunities, and I just started telling people I knew what I was up to.
Yep.
Something happened. Some family members invested, a few friends invested, a few people from Palantir that, some were at Palantir, some had moved on to other companies, Anduril and other startups, invested. And I just noticed they were so excited to be a part of what I was doing. And they offered to help.
Yeah.
Hey, let us know if we can, if any, one person told me, if anyone wants to talk government contracting, like put me in touch. I'm like, man, that is amazing. That's going to be everybody. But, so just
Right.
all,
Right.
and so I pretty quickly decided, um, to raise my first fund. What I really wanted to raise was a team to work with. So I
Mhm.
just systematically told everybody I could get in touch with from Palantir what I was up to in a very soft pitch. Here's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If you'd like to be a part of it, would love to have you on board. And I had a reduced minimum
Yep.
for folks from Palantir. So I ended up raising that first fund from 120
Yeah.
Palantirians invested in the fund. And then Bain Capital came in. And so raised a $10 million fund. And
Yeah.
um,
That's great. Just so everyone knows what you're talking about, I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right, but some folks like you and us raise capital from a lot of people, right? You can raise a fund and just have, a couple institutions put in $10 million each and you're done. But
yeah,
we have over 100, and I think you just said over 100 um, investors, or also called LPs. And it's incredible because you've now got 100 people who care about what you're doing. And when somebody calls them up and says, hey, I'm starting a company, they're like, oh, hey, they get
yeah.
greedy and they funnel it to their venture fund. And it's a lot of work, to have that many LPs, but it's pretty neat.
I totally agree. And you might be the first VC to tell me that because everyone else told me you are nuts for having that many LPs. Um, but I just didn't see it that way. To me, this was my team.
Yeah.
And so
That's a
these
great way to
like,
put it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I feel like the luckiest, most fortunate guy in the world to have this many incredible people
Yeah.
on the team.
And
And it feels more like a collective, like a big team, and
yeah.
not a solo GP doing his own thing kind of thing.
What do you make of? Oh, before we wrap up, I want to ask you. The name Palantir is pretty specific, right? It comes from Lord of the Rings, like
Mm.
the seeing stones of Middle Earth. Did you know what that was when you joined, or had you read science fiction or fantasy, or is that just kind of a? Because as
Yeah,
soon as I heard it, I'm like, I know what that is because I read all that stuff when I was a kid.
yeah, same. I knew what it was, and I love the name, and
Yeah.
and it's something that can be used for good or evil, and it's and it's like powerful seeing stones, and so I liked it, and um, yeah, and I think yeah, and there's lots of other great Lord of the Rings company names out there now too, Andril and
Yeah,
others. Um,
Androl's great. There's a bunch that are great. So for people who don't know, the Palantir or the Palantiria, they're the seeing stones of Middle Earth. They're like kind of the one, like sometimes fantasy the hacks just get silly, right? Because people are just
yeah,
teleporting all over the place, or But the seeing stones were kind of the way to see around Middle Earth. Somebody just has a new company though called Sauron, and that one just doesn't feel right to me. That just seems too on the nose. Like you need to get kind of the weird Silmarillion stuff to name your company.
leave a little to the
Um,
imagination. Yeah.
yeah, it's Peter Thiel who does that, right? Who all his things are different Tolkien things, I think.
Yeah, that does seem to be the connection. I don't think that's coming down from him as a requirement or anything, just part of the culture. Yeah,
Right. Mithril.
yeah.
So, what do you as we wrap up a little bit? What like how's it going with your fun, and what do you make of the idea? It seems like a lot of people have all of a sudden, they kind of erased the Web3 from their website, venture capitalists, and it became AI. Now there's a whole bunch of people defense, on their website. There's a flurry of defense VCs. What do you kind of make of that trend?
Yeah. So let's see. Things are going great. I started the fund. I started this fund one in the middle of 22. And I'm about 75% deployed now. We've invested in about 30 companies, mostly in defense and energy, industrials, and a lot of software stuff. That's where most of my network is software engineers,
Yeah.
coming out of Palantir. Um, I'm just doing my thing. I've always been working on this. I don't pay too much attention to what other people are doing. It is really funny. It is strange and funny to for this stuff to be in vogue now. And
Yeah.
I'm still used to the days where we had people protesting out front,
Yeah.
and but it is
It's,
but 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 it is a good thing, right?
right.
It is a good thing, and I think Palantir and SpaceX and Anduril, like the success of these companies, is great for America. It's great for Western civilization, but it's also really inspiring the next generation of founders and engineers.
Yeah.
And so I think it's fantastic. It is. I do chuckle sometimes though at how
Yeah.
how fast things can
Right.
change.
Well,
And
look, there's always been some guy who is in the security forces in Israel or something, and they start a company or a venture firm. And you're like, of course, like that makes
yeah,
sense. But there's a few where it's like it is definitely a little bit the flavor of the moment. What anything has anything surprised you? I mean, you've got a fund, you're investing. Is there anything where you're like, oh, that's I didn't know that would be that hard, or that would be that great, or
you know, um, I've really enjoyed working with founders, and I'm finding that um, this is a relationship business, and I think
yeah,
part of why I've been drawn to venture capital is I love learning new things. I loved the engineering challenges when I was at Palantir, but one of the reasons I was drawn towards this forward deployed engineer role is because I wanted to be around people, and I wanted to get out and understand how things work and make a difference. And um, so I've learned a lot during this course of this first fund. And there's so much of VC is relationship based and
yep.
trust based, and so that's something that's been a nice change, something that I've enjoyed. Um, and yeah,
Well,
and I'm having a blast with it.
You're coming right in on the AI wave.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that you think. I mean, well, our point of view is like Web3 didn't really resonate with us a lot at 8-Bit Capital, but AI has a hype component, but is a real thing. Like underneath the hood, like people are going to do some incredible things, and it's that technology is evolving at a pretty astonishing rate.
Yeah. Luckily, I was able to ride kind of that wave a bit in my career at Palantir. The last project I worked on was Project Maven. It's the work that Google had started with DoD. They ended up pulling out of that because
what the
a
heck
few hundred.
Happened? Wait, do I get this right? Google just stopped doing defense work?
In 2017, they did. Yeah, that's right. As I remember it, a few hundred employees were upset that they were working with the Department of Defense and threatened to quit if Google didn't pull out of that. Of course, I wasn't involved with that at all, so I don't know exactly what was happening. But
doesn't Google have 20,000 other employees?
Exactly, I know.
Right.
So they stopped that work, and Palantir swooped in.
Yeah.
We took over that contract. I jumped onto that team, and it was incredible. We were building, kind of to your point, we were building tools that solved a real problem. And AI was a real lever to productivity and mission impact. And so at that time, it was mostly computer vision stuff that we were doing. And then the large language model stuff came later. But I think back to that work I did in Kandahar and how amazing it would be to have a do-over with large language models. Like I mentioned, I was working with these 18-year-old intelligence analysts, and they're fresh out of high school, pretty computer savvy though, and so we were doing things like helping them very quickly get an understanding of a local village, who the power brokers are, what's been going on, like how do I understand. How do I find and understand the intelligence reporting that was done in the last few months? And so we were doing this with like keyword searches or other like text-based analysis of if this word of your district and this word are within 3 of each other, surface that. We do like these geo searches and pretty crude stuff for trying to surface the needle and haystack stuff, or at least just like surface the relevant reports. How amazing would it be now to have, a few thousand intelligence reports from the last month and have them in a repository with a large language model, and I could just simply ask like what attacks have taken place over the last 3 months. Are there more attacks that happen when there's a full moon or not? Or things that would be fun to do again. So this is an exciting time to be. Now I'm in a bit more of a supportive role.
That's right.
I still do volunteer to jump into the mix with founders if they'll have me, but otherwise I'm mostly in a supporting role now.
So is there we wrap up? Is there a Fund 2 on the way? What are you excited about now?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm gonna launch a Fund 2 next year, early next year. That'll be a $30 million fund. And, we're just going to keep the good times rolling. I think I've kind of found my niche, and love supporting founders working in these critical technologies and critical sectors. We'll bump up our check size, which I'm really excited about, just be much more impactful and helpful to founders. And, so excited to keep working.
This is great. How do people find you? Like if they want to hear what you're thinking or tell you a little bit about what they're working on, like what's the.
Yeah, well, I went from never using LinkedIn to having a pretty active LinkedIn presence. So I think that's part of being a VC. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me, mark@deployed.vc.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Kent. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Great. All right, this has been the Something About Your podcast. Mark Scianna, my guest. Talk to you next time.